James Seltzer, and I'm here with Ted Knutson to my right. Ted is an investment banker. And I am also here with Andrew Fiorentino. Andrew is a fantasy baseball writer for rotowire.com. We're here to talk about baseball and statistics in the world of sabermetrics. The first topic that we want to touch on today is the idea of sabermetrics and Billy Beane, the Oakland Athletics. Everyone knows about Moneyball, the popular book, now popular movie with Brad Pitt. But the interesting thing about Moneyball and about Billy Beane was that he found an inefficiency in baseball and used statistics as a way to fill that inefficiency and to change the way the game was looked at and the way that teams and general managers built teams. Right. So let's talk about sabermetrics a little bit in general. Ted, give us a little background on Billy Beane and on sabermetrics and why he did what he did.
Let's put it into a slightly larger social context. From let's say the 1950s to the 1970s, U.S. industry was very much a cottage industry across the board. Forget about anything that you're talking about in business. In around the late 1970s and the early 1980s, there was sort of a revolution with the rise of management consulting, with the rise of the McKinsey Group and Boston Consulting, et cetera. What it led to was a great infusion of statistics and metrics into business practices. If you look at any industry in the United States over that time period, look at automobile industry, you had the rise of Six Sigma and these Kaizen systems and key performance indicators that really revolutionized the way that people did business. Baseball, on the other hand, really remained a cottage industry. It was really dependent on the knowledge of experts well up until the late 1990s. I mean, Billy Beane was really only applying the same kind of statistical rigor that any other industry, in the country was doing at the time, but he was just the first one to apply it to baseball, borrowing heavily from the work of Bill James in the late 1970s. But within the wider social context, all it is bringing the best practices of the business community to baseball. I mean, I think if you look at it in that way, it was inevitable. As
in best practices, as in statistical analysis and looking at the game in a different way?
It was about breaking down physical things into numbers and looking for efficiencies, or specifically, as you said, inefficiencies within those numbers to capitalize on them. I think in that sense, by the fact that it was happening in every other industry, it was inevitable that it would happen in baseball. Billy Beane happened to be the person who did it, and hats off to him.
You mentioned Bill James. Bill James was the original person who came up with these statistical formulas. He did the Bill James abstract in, I think, the late 70s. And, again, laid the groundwork for what Billy Beane would do a decade later. Andrew, you want to talk a little bit about Bill James, your view on Bill James and kind of his contribution to baseball?
What Bill James did was he figured out, essentially, that a formula for baseball, right? So everything has, in baseball, a very sort of standardized series of outcomes. So that's where you find those inefficiencies that Teddy was talking about. And so you can compute with statistics whether guys have been lucky, what kind of value they're offering through, the performance that they're giving you, and whether it's sustainable. And so that's what Bill James started to do, and it's been refined over the last, 30 or so years.
I think what he really, did was he exposed the fact that what we thought we knew about baseball, what the experts thought they knew about baseball, wasn't necessarily true. Not that it wasn't true in most cases, because it probably was true in most cases. But if you think of a reliever like Chad Bradford, who people overlooked simply because he looked funny the way he threw, what we thought we knew about baseball, we didn't always know.
I think that. Go ahead, Andrew.
The facts of baseball were, and even now still are to a large degree, sort of based in this scouting mindset from, baseball goes back to, the 1800s. And people think, well, we've been in this sport all our lives. We know what baseball looks like. But in fact, sample sizes and anecdotal evidence can do a lot to change a scout's mind, where numbers just are what they are. And so you had this sort of grounded view where they're just like, well, I saw this, I liked it, this guy's going to be good, whereas maybe statistics might say otherwise.
I think that's actually one of the key points of Moneyball is the idea that Billy Beane comes in and he's fighting with these scouts and trying to get them to look at the game in this type of statistical way, whereas all they're seeing is how fast a guy runs. And Billy Beane, as was mentioned, was a number 2 overall, number 2 overall pick, I think, after Darryl Strawberry. And for those reasons, he was an athletic, freak, and he was, physically dominant. And his career did not turn out to be worthy of that high draft pick as well. And maybe that's something, who knows, statistically could have been foreseen.
Correct. I think that what you have is any kind of he's a technocrat. He's basically bringing a technocratic view into the sport, and that always kind of creates a fission with the old guard. I mean, again, it happens in every industry. Baseball is not the exception to the rule; it is the rule. And it continues. And if you look at it from my viewpoint, my worldview, as a businessman, it's constant. It's constant. It's inevitable because the more data that became available and the easier it became to track it, the advent of computers, the advent of statistical analysis programs, it was a tool. It was out there. It was right there for the plucking, and then he took it.
There are a lot of hypotheses out there about what is the next Billy Beane, if there is such a thing. What is the next Moneyball? Where is that next market inefficiency? UZR, ultimate zone rating for defensive metrics, is something that has been talked about a lot as kind of the next frontier. But I don't know if that's necessarily true. I wanted to ask both you guys in terms of where do you see that next market inefficiency, that next level of statistical analysis that's going to actually make an impact for teams, that's actually going to change the way that people look at baseball, look at acquiring players, look at building teams. So, Andrew, let's start with you.
I think if I really knew the answer to that, I'd be working for the Mets already.
Well said. That is true.
It's so it's a little hard to say, predicting the next revolution, but I think defensive metrics certainly have a long way to go, and even related to that, our concept of WAR, or whatever sort of relative value statistic that we come up with, is, I think, the next big thing, is to get something more concrete, more strictly defined, more hopefully consistent on the defensive side.
Sure. Ted?
I again, same, because I would really like to run the front office for the Mets. If I did have the answer to this question, I would be doing that job. But there's a couple that I would think about. The first would be as the quality of the international leagues grow. I mean, you're not in the old days. I mean, you kind of had Japanese baseball, which was the only other place in the world that people would play. Now, the Taiwanese league has gotten significantly better. You have pretty decent baseball being played in Venezuela and a bunch of the Caribbean countries.
And Cuba.
And certainly, and obviously, certainly the burgeoning market in Cuba. I think being able to attach a statistical weight to these various markets, so you could say, if so and so did, we're very good at saying if a player performs this way in A ball, he's going to do about this well in double A ball, or he isn't, in which case he's going to be called out of the field. Any statistical analysis that would allow you to say, okay, kids who's hitting this in the Cuban league, that's equivalent to what in Double A? Mm-hmm. That'd be a huge upgrade. A couple other ones that I would think about. The first one would be some kind of metric that has to do with speed. How does speed affect the game? We hear a lot about really dynamic players. You have what's his name, D. Gordon. You have Jose Reyes, and you have the concept of these players.
Jose who? I've never heard of that.
Yeah. Traitor. But you have guys that really change the game with their speed. How do they change the game? They change the game because not only because they get on base a lot, or a chop hit for them, a chop or a bunt for them is they have a good chance of making it first base. That's not really how they change the game. They change the game in terms of their range. They change the game in the fact that every time they hit a routine ground ball, the shortstop or the third baseman has to rush and throw, and how many errors are created, how many things are misthrown, how much does it affect a pitcher to watch Jose Reyes dance off first base all the time? What's the relative ERA for the pitcher when Jose Reyes is on first base? There's something there. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I'm seeing a lot of move towards speed in baseball in the front office, and obviously we're not privy to everything that they're thinking, but obviously speed is becoming more and more of a premium, as it was in, say, like the mid-1980s in the age of Rickey Henderson, Vince Coleman.
Sure.
Certainly in this post-steroid era, speed is taking on a new value that it sort of had, I wouldn't say lost, but it had been sort of suppressed behind power for a while as guys were hitting 50 and 60 and 70 home runs.
Right.
And now that they're not, you have to find ways to create runs.
Right. And sabermetricians, or if you want, saber magicians.
There you go.
Oh no!
Oh yeah,
No.
I said it. The saber magicians for many years didn't really like stolen bases. You know, I mean, Billy Beane has a very has a rampage in Moneyball, both about bunts and stolen bases, right?
As long as you succeed often enough.
Yeah, well, exactly.
As with anything.
But it's, he said, don't give up the out, don't give up the out, don't give up the out. I think that paradigm is shifting, because I think you have players who have now outstanding speed, because you've moved away from the power hitting paradigm toward a faster paradigm. The third and final one that I would think about would be something to do with health, because there's something about staying on the field which is becoming increasingly valuable, especially as you see more and more stars off the field for a lot of games, i.e. Jose Reyes. I think there's some kind of, just having done a lot of stuff like this in the financial world, there's some kind of regression analysis. There's some kind of body of work data where you can say if a guy has a problem with his oblique, he's this likely to have this many games on the DL. If he has problems with his hamstring and he plays this position, if you can look at a large body of data in its totality, I think there's got to be some kind of health plus metric. And if you can, I think more than anything else, that would be really valuable as a differentiator. How do you keep players on the field? How do you pick players who are more likely to be on the field? And it also creates an inefficiency in the market. For example, the Mets in the last couple of years, because they had no money, and because there was a new sheriff in town with Sandy Alderson, they've been taking a lot of chances on post-surgery players. People who are coming off Tommy John surgery, people who are coming off shoulder surgery. Chris Young last year, a bad bet, but that being said, that being said, it's a huge inefficiency in the market, because guys are written off when they have certain injuries, and some of them come back, some of them don't. There's for every Chris Young, there is a Chan Mian Wang. It took 3 years, but he looks like he'll be back in the big leagues. So it's so the three I would talk about in conclusion would be health, speed, and something to do with this foreign league. And I'm not sure what that is, but as that grows, there's an opportunity.
Next time we're going to dive into a few of those stats a little bit more, maybe get into your BABIP calculator. That'll be exciting for everybody. And
I know I'm on the edge of my seat.
So we're going to come back next time and talk a little more statistics, talk a little more baseball. For Andrew and Teddy, I'm James Seltzer. Thank you for watching.